realize that? He's like, no, 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 no. And I'm like, oh god. Oh, you're from Europe. Like, anyway. So yeah, that's my life. It's really fun.
My biggest thing with it is that biologically there are no races.
I'm just saying, like,
You
literally.
know, you can have sex with that other individual and actually conceive of a child, then it's not like a species difference
Yeah.
or a racial.
Or what they call
whatever.
pure. There's no such thing as pure.
I'm part Neanderthal.
Oh, we know.
I got my genetic, thingy, and it said 1.2% Neanderthal.
Were you offended by it if a caveman could do it?
I was.
I know, I knew it.
The Gecko commercial. Geico commercial.
So easy a caveman
Okay, but, yeah, so my first issue with that, yes, you can, by the way, years ago, before Dinesh D'Souza went off the deep end, and he went off the deep end. What happened to, this one? Not have. All right, well, let's just go. Notice the heritage, folks are in, so the end of racism. This is not supposed to be part of what I'm discussing today, but Dinesh is from India. He got a scholarship to Stanford. And as he arrived, he discovered that he was black. In India, he was part of the highest caste, C-A-S-T-E, right?
Right.
Like a Brahmin. He's a Brahmin. In India, everyone respects him. He comes to the United States and he became black. And he was like, what? And so he did his own study of it, and he discovered that yes, the United States has this caste system, not really based on biology, although it is based on appearances, right? But biologically, of course, there's no real grounds for saying this individual is in this race. At least not yet, as far as I understand. Genetics doesn't enable that to
Welcome to sociology, then.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, you could trace all this ridiculousness to particular individuals in European science that took skulls of all sorts of people, had them all lined up on the walls, and made categorizations based on skull size and shape and just ridiculous things. But basically, the way we end racism in this country is to stop having forms where you have to fill in what your race is. To stop it.
But then you can make a case for
Just
DEI.
like Trump, we could stop COVID. All you have to do is stop testing.
Then you can make a case for DEI.
I like this book. I
Typically
thought this
singling
was a
out
good
race
book
as
at the
a
time.
precursor to anything. That is racism in itself.
So this was a good book.
Does it say that it's
Dinesh-
like impossible?
Does he say it's what?
Does it say that it's impossible?
Racism?
Yeah, to end.
We absolutely have racism.
Yeah. No, does it say that it's impossible?
But it's a social construct, right? So it's a social construct, not a biological construct.
Yeah.
And as a result, it's real. I mean, Hegel tells us that social constructs are real. But the trouble is, since it is a social construct and not a biological one, we can socially change it so that it goes away. That's his argument.
Okay.
We're not
Obviously, that hasn't worked.
Yeah,
I mean,
we're not
like,
even close.
you know,
You have to go to a higher plane of existence.
But notice if you leave our culture and go to other cultures like France, And I don't know how many French, well, American black writers who have moved to France and get there and discover, hey, they're not black there. They're
Yeah,
people.
don't
They're
say
people
Canada.
there.
They're very racist in Canada.
I haven't had experience with Canada, other than Charles Taylor and.
That's what I'm referencing.
But yeah, there's French authors. What I think of them as French authors now, but they were Americans, but they're black, and they moved to France, and they discover that they don't have a racist. There are other problems, of course. You know, every society has its problem. And one of the big ones would be make sure you learn to speak French in France.
Yeah.
Or they will.
You know, because I'm sure my French
Look down on
would be,
you.
my French would not pass muster, right? However, sorry about that.
I also have another question. Our third test or third quick or what is it called?
Exam 3?
Yeah, exam 3 and the term paper. They're both due like the last 2 weeks of school.
Yes.
Okay.
It wouldn't make sense to have them due before the end of the semester and then expect you to still come. I mean, you know, I want people to keep coming to class. Even the final, which, by the way, I won't do a final on the final. We probably will have a double period for our final session on finals week, and I will be here for that, but I don't have a final test to give anybody. So please come. I hope to try to be entertaining, but if you have a conflict with other tests because of the way that whole last week is, I understand, no problem. But yeah, I won't have a quiz question for that last meeting either. You know, I just hopefully have all you can talk about philosophy discussion with anybody.
Yeah, I like how Veterans Day is on Tuesday next week, in between both our classes.
In fact, Benji's not here, and he asked to speak with me after class, so I don't know if that's going to happen. So you do end up with this Hegelian concept that truth evolves, morality progresses. We think of all sorts of things as progressing. So, of course, you get into a dilemma. By the way, this will be an American problem, especially. John Dewey, who we will discuss very close to the end of the semester, is an American Hegelian philosopher. And he realizes that the word truth actually is problematic, because when people get latched onto the word truth, they think that's permanent. But the problem with a contemporary view of what is true is that it could evolve. And so you have to be open to the possibility that what we believe is true next week will be different. And so he comes up with the concept of a warranted assertion. Instead of saying this is true, a scientist should say this is our warranted assertion. Based on the data that we have at this point, we can warrantedly assert that this, whatever, right? As opposed to saying it's true. Because the word true actually makes you feel like, gosh, that ought to be true all the time. The world spirit, Weltgeist, is what? Well, the cultural mood of the entire world? No, how do you figure that out? That's where, of course, Napoleon came in, you know, because Napoleon seemed to be the Weltgeist on a white horse, in fact, in that particular point in time, because he was leading the French Empire and its movement that seemed to be just an incredible movement that everybody, at least in Hegel's milieu, thought was absolutely fantastic, even though they were Germans and they were losing.
I mean, you could make an argument for Caesar in the same context when the Roman Empire was that accomplished.
And the concept of God is the root and end of all. God is spirit and freedom. The world's soul is active dynamic and developing. I remember reading Hegel thought, reading the morning newspaper is now our morning prayer. So instead of just going to church and reiterating something over and over, rereading something, instead reading the newspaper, finding out what God is actually doing today through the political process, through nature, through that's the universe. That's what God is doing. So, and by the way, he also argues that Jesus, at the point where Jesus recognized that he was God, if he did, or at least that we recognize that Jesus is God, what we do in doing that is we say that the self-consciousness of God begins at that point. Because that seems like a requirement for God to be self-conscious, and who wouldn't think that God isn't self-conscious? I mean, did I say that right? God is obviously self-conscious. Because self-conscious is a step above mere consciousness. And we think of God as the highest, so God must be self-conscious. But officially, God doesn't become self-conscious until he's also man. Because as a man, God is self-conscious. By the way, when people say, is the universe self-aware? The answer is, of course, yes, because we're part of the universe, and guess what? We're self-aware. So that means that the universe is self-aware. Thank you to you for thinking of yourself as part of the universe, etc. Right? So the world spirit realizes itself through history. What we see is history. So the interest in the history of philosophy is how does this world spirit progress? And by the way, we also have a philosophy of history. So philosophy of history becomes a subject, and he writes 3 volumes on the philosophy of history, because there's lots of different ways of trying to understand history. In fact, just the other day, I don't know if you noticed it, but they had a 2-part special on Henry Kissinger, which I and my wife enjoyed, and I got to watch some of it on YouTube. It's on YouTube as well. That reminded me that I have lots of Henry Kissinger's books that I've collected over the year. But one of the things they mentioned was his graduating thesis as an undergraduate at Harvard was the longest thesis ever written in Harvard. That's funny. So I checked online, and his thesis is online, and I was amazed to discover that Henry Kissinger was dealing with exactly the same issues I was dealing with in my college days. It was a little earlier than me, of course, but nonetheless, it turned out he was talking about Descartes and Hume and Kant and Hegel and how all this goes together and the meaning of history. What is the meaning of history? Well, you have to do metaphysics in order to establish a meaning in history. And there he goes. And of course, he's Hegelian in that. So that was kind of cool. So the will, self-interest, and action of humans are the means by which spirit realizes its goals. By the way, Pope Benedict the 16th, also known as Joseph Ratzinger, he's still on my list of philosophers, by the way, but Pope Benedict argued in multiple places that the Trinity, right? If you're a Christian, you're supposed to believe in the Trinity, although you can be a variety of different Christians, some of which are Unitarians, for example, which means there's only one instead of a Trinity. But the Trinity, as he explains, and he was Pope, which is, that's cool, that God the Father, so-called, is the, why do we have that concept? It's the creator of the universe. That's the explanation for why there's a universe. In fact, he says that there's basically no difference between Buddhism and Christianity, except that in Christianity we think of God as other, whereas in Buddhism you don't think of the universe as having an other. So Buddhism, the universe is all there is. Christianity, you believe that there is the universe, but somehow outside of the universe is God, and God created the universe. The second part of the Trinity is Jesus, and Jesus is at least a role model, an imaginary, we try to think how, I'm not saying that Jesus was imaginary, but the idea that Jesus as a spirit expresses to us is this is the role model for the right life, the correct life, the moral life. That's number two. And number three, the Holy Ghost, or the Holy Spirit, the third part of the Trinity, is the Spirit of God among us. In other words, this socially constructed reality that the groups of Christians all believe together is the third part of the Trinity. But it